Hi, Becky.
And welcome back, all moms, dads, and caregivers.
So already our fourth and final guest.
A terrific mom with a lot of wisdom to share.
You want to get us started?
Sure. So our guest is named Niz. She has 4 grown children, 3 daughters and a son, plus her youngest child, another son, who's still at home.
And he's now entering into that period of his life where, he's really discovering who he is and making decisions and pathways in his life. And he's getting ready to start high school. We like to go to his sporting events. He's on the school team. He plays basketball.
The family has been through a whole lot. More on that shortly. And as a result,
we try to lead an extremely boring life. Quiet and solitude and no drama is, it just feels so good.
So even when Niz offers to take her son out after a game,
he's like, no, I just want to go home and chill. So that's what we do. We go home and chill.
And Niz wouldn't mind if it stays quiet for many years to come. Here's what she's hoping for down the road.
It's going to sound so silly. I am looking forward to late night phone calls when my kids, not that they need me, but for them to call and just be like, oh my God, Mom, you're never going to believe this.
What are you thinking, Erin?
I'm thinking that I see this quite a bit. Families who have seen a lot of trauma, they want days and nights that are calm, peaceful, and quiet.
Yeah. So, Erin, after that opening, I know our listeners are curious.
Our story will focus on a single traumatic event, one that happened when Niz's youngest son, the one now entering high school, was just a baby.
Right. But before we talk about it, we need to share a bit about Niz's history. It's full of trauma. And listeners, this may be another time when you want to be sure that your children aren't nearby.
There's a lot to share, and it's going to come at you quickly. Try to absorb as much as you can, but remember, this is just a backdrop for the main story. We'll start with Niz's childhood.
I come from a long, long line of trauma, like many generations back. For myself specifically, some really intense traumas that affected the way that I parented my children who were going through their own traumas. Growing up, I didn't have that person that protected me from the things that happened in my childhood. My brother tried his best, but he was a child himself.
And then there's this.
My parents both died before I hit 20.
So she's had a rough childhood. She's barely an adult, and her parents have passed away.
That's right. As a young adult, Niz got married, moved far away from home, and started a family. But more trauma was on its way. Niz's first child died at the age of 7 months.
And of course, infant mortality is so hard on any couple.
Yes, it is. Niz and her husband wanted a family, and they proceeded to build a family. And fortunately, from then on, Niz's children were healthy. But there was more to come. Niz's husband had a substance use disorder, and within a few years, the marriage had become quite tense. At one point, Niz suspected that he'd started using again. She threatened to kick him out unless he put family first. Not long after she made that threat, he died of a heart attack at the age of 26.
She was so young, and she's lost both a child and a husband.
And at the time of her husband's death, she was pregnant. She gave birth, and then she was on her own with 3 young daughters to care for.
That loss was extremely difficult for my older children. Losing my husband put a strain on them that I know impacts them even to this day, even to their adulthood. And then we were also very poor.
Niz chose to move back home. When she did, she saw that a family member needed help. That family member was Niz's half-brother, who was in elementary school. He had special needs, but Niz saw that he wasn't getting the care he required. She became concerned, and after a while, she adopted him.
So she's on her own. She's poor. She has 3 kids of her own. And now she has a 4th child with special needs.
Right. And not much later, a social service agency stepped in and removed Niz's half-brother from her care, judging that they, the state, could do a better job of meeting his needs. Niz was devastated.
Even more loss for Niz.
Yes. Niz decided that she needed to get away, far away. She moved with her 3 daughters to a big city. For a while, her housing situation was tenuous. She accepted help through a friend, but she soon learned that she was sharing housing with a violent criminal who started to control every aspect of her life.
Can I just say the obvious? This is more than anyone should have to deal with.
I know. She and her daughters escaped and resettled a few hundred miles away in a quiet rural community. Niz started a new relationship and gave birth to a son. But by mutual agreement, the relationship ended. Niz, once again, was on her own with 4 small kids.
Okay, so obviously a very challenging beginning for any family. But there's something else that makes her situation even more difficult. Niz is of mixed heritage, Native American and African American, and she's raising her children in a community that is nearly entirely white.
So, listeners, that's the backdrop. Take a breath. Let all of that settle for a bit. You can even press pause for a few minutes. We'll be here when you get back. Maybe you could take the next segment, Becky.
Sure. Niz was on her own for a few years, quietly raising her kids. And then she fell in love.
I had started to date this guy. I thought I did a little healing and was ready for another relationship.
It seemed to be going pretty well. Niz became pregnant and gave birth to a son.
So this is the son we met at the beginning of this episode, the one just now entering high school, the youngest of her 5 living children.
Right. But Niz's new relationship deteriorated.
And he ended up being a nightmare. He was a violent person.
Niz soon learned that the man had courted her using a false identity, and he had a history of violent crime. In retrospect, Niz can see that she had overlooked the signs, but at the time...
And I was too in love and too focused on like that happy piece that felt good. It all came to a head kind of all at once and abruptly.
When she fully appreciated her situation, she made a choice.
What it boiled down to was me making the decision to leave him, and the punishment being him trying to end my life in front of my children.
The man beat Niz so brutally that she was unconscious and nearly bled out while her children watched. He also assaulted one of her daughters by slamming her leg in a car door.
All of this in front of little kids.
In time, Niz recovered from her physical injuries, but she was once again alone, and she had little support.
Yes, she was alone. We asked her about friends.
I didn't have any. I had a handful of people that I knew, but nobody really knew what was going on in our lives. There were people, that they cared about us or that maybe knew we were, going through something and it was a hard time.
And there's more.
Right around the same time that this had happened, my brother was murdered. I didn't have any family to lean into.
So much trauma. And yet, we will indeed see some remarkable post-traumatic growth. So, our listeners will be relieved to hear that the man who assaulted Niz was arrested, tried, convicted, and imprisoned. And he's still in prison with no end in sight.
But even with her attacker in custody, Niz lived in fear. She imagined that he'd find a way to get someone else to come after her family.
I think I was in survival mode for a long time.
Her kids were afraid too.
They were not okay with being away from me.
And Niz was unsure of how to respond.
How do you help children who are up all night scared of, the monster that's going to come get them, and the monster is their father?
So she followed her instincts. Often that meant letting her kids act out.
If they needed to express themselves with foul language, I didn't punish them. I let them express themselves however they needed, from shaving their heads off, which was it was just bizarre. How do you enter into a punk rocker stage at 3-4 years old, and how do you even know about it? The level of emotion was almost volatile. So there were many times where you'd hear a 5-year-old screaming, "Fuck!" and no apparent consequences.
Letting the kids behave this way, it seemed to help. So Niz stuck with the strategy.
Mainly, I think it was just leaning into each other and allowing that space to feel and to think freely and to speak freely. Crying and hugging and holding, and I think we all understood in our own ways just how close we came to losing each other.
Over time, she helped them talk about what they were thinking and feeling.
As they all got older, they were able to express themselves more, but giving them the vernacular, giving them the ability not just to feel like they can come to you, but also the knowledge of word options.
The kids also coped through humor, and Niz loved it.
All of my kids just walk around in a constant state of a comedy show running through their head. It's hysterical. They are the funniest people I've ever met in my life. It's not just cornball humor. It's dark. It's the type of humor that secretly we all love to watch. Everything is a joke. They have the ability to be serious, but there is nothing off limits. Nothing. They'd be like, "Hey, you want to hear a dad joke?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." And they'd be like, "Sorry, I don't have one," and walk away. "Hey, can I show you a magic trick my dad showed me?" And I'd be like, "Sure." And they'd go behind a blanket on the stair, and then the blanket would drop and they wouldn't be there. And I'd be like, "Oh my God."
In addition to humor, Niz reinforced optimism wherever she could.
Their undying ability to see the silver lining in the clouds. Every single turn, all of us always looked for that little bit of sunshine that leaked through.
What's on your mind, Erin?
Some of our listeners might have a hard time accepting some of the behaviors that the kids showed.
Like the screaming and the swearing?
Or even the dark humor. But one way to look at it is that by allowing her kids to express themselves however they wanted to, she's trying to meet her kids where they are. She's listening.
That's so important. And here's how Niz puts it.
If I had to boil it down and condense it, it's trying to pay really close attention to what your child needs. I recognize that kids can't express what they need, but they can tell you through their actions. They can tell you through their breath, the way that they breathe. When they cuddle up to you and you listen to their heartbeat, their hearts will tell you. We just have to open ourselves up and listen to everything that they're telling us without words.
That's really beautiful.
Niz explained a bit more about how she tries to connect with her kids.
Getting on a level of what they like, right? Spending time with them didn't mean doing the things that I would prefer to do, which is exhausting. It's exhausting as a parent to sit down and listen to a child explain a Lego set to you. I know that sounds horrible.
It sounds honest.
Right?
I had one that loved to read. And as she got older, she liked less for me to read to her. She would read to me. I had one that just wanted to be outside, so going for a walk with her.
Niz went on to say a bit about her motivation.
The desire to understand my children came from wishing that somebody had understood me as a kid, or at least been there to protect me.
That makes sense to me. And it seems like Niz works really hard to connect with her kids.
I'm sensing a but.
But the entire family has been through so much. I'm anticipating that healing and recovery will require even more.
And that's what we'll discuss next. So, Niz herself was thinking that all of this was too much to manage on her own. So, she considered therapy.
I had such a fear surrounding therapy and a fear of what would come because this had happened. And ultimately, I allowed this to happen because I allowed this person in my life.
So she fears that therapy will lead to her feeling blamed for what happened.
Or even that the state might take away her children. Remember her experience with her half-brother.
Really, as a parent, one of the scariest things to think about, like your children not being with you because of decisions that you have made or things that you allowed or things that maybe were out of your control, but still you were the adult.
Eventually, she did overcome her fear.
I think it took like 3 years once they started to like really be able to voice that it still haunted them. I was like, I need to get over my fear of therapy and get my kids into some services. It was scary to like let go and let somebody, for lack of better terms, meddle in our business, right? To trust and have faith that things are going to work out the way that they were meant to work out. But I had this really intense faith, this belief that the universe would make happen whatever needed to happen that was going to be best for my children, even if that meant somebody gets involved and they're no longer with me.
That seems so brave.
Yes, deciding that she was ready to accept help was a big step. The next challenge, finding the right help.
We went through a lot of therapists. There were some that chose to walk away because they felt that they couldn't provide our family for what they needed. I had one therapist tell me she couldn't be my therapist because she needed a therapist to deal with me. We couldn't go to a male therapist, even my sons. Building trust, that was the hardest part, not just for me, but for my kids too.
Niz began noticing how some of the therapists were able to gain trust with her kids.
What I found that they all had in common was they started out just like they were in a classroom, getting to know a kid that was sitting in the corner by themselves. It had nothing to do with what's wrong. It was more like, hey, let's be friends and let's talk. And that made a really big difference. The openness, honesty, and building that trust.
Niz saw big benefits from her kids' therapy, but it took a lot of effort.
Getting mental health help for children is extremely difficult. And then once they reach the age where it's like easier, they have the decision to not go.
We also talked with Niz about her own therapy.
Look at myself and do a lot of self-reflection in order to be the best moving forward for my children and helping them deal and cope and heal. I was able to accept my own faults and inabilities, I guess would be the best word. I've always had a sense of like self-reflection. But I definitely feel like having professionals helped me hone that skill in a way that helped me. Helping me helped my children.
Helping me helped my children. I think that piece is so important. Many parents think they have to put their own needs aside so they can focus on their kids.
Right, but usually when a child experiences a trauma, so does the parent.
And as Niz said herself, to be the best parent you can, you need to understand how your own trauma shapes your parenting. So, Becky, we could try to speak directly to our listeners right now and maybe offer some advice, but let's let Niz do the talking instead.
Right, let's listen. First, about the need to fully immerse yourself in therapy.
Humanize yourself, you know? It's scary going to somebody and opening up in ways that shows like the rawness and the wounds. But there are things inside of us that we, like, where do they come from? Making those connections about the things that we've gone through and how it's affected our perspective. And in turn, our perspective has affected the way that we move and the way that we have parented. You can have conversations with somebody all day long and want healing, but you have to like viscerally want it and know that there are things about yourself that are only going to change if you accept that you don't know. You don't know everything about yourself.
Niz also offered some broader points of view for consideration.
Every trial and tribulation brings out either the absolute best in somebody or the absolute worst. And there are really only two types of people in the world. Those who will turn everything that they go through into an experience, something to learn from, and anything can be that lesson. And the other is that everything that they go through turns into an excuse. And there's a darkness in that. But we can teach ourselves how to do one or the other.
She has some motivational words as well.
People used to ask me all the time, how do you do it? I'd get, how do you do it? How do you raise all these kids? How do you keep a smile on your face all the time? How do you get through your day? You just do it. Don't overthink it. So what? You don't have a degree in psychology. You don't have money. You don't have a support system. You don't have, the list can go on and on and on of things that you don't have. But what you do have is yourself. We live in a world where you can literally look up anything. If you have a desire for it, you can make it happen. And it doesn't have to be a big change, but allowing yourself to go through even the smallest process and just do it.
And some inspiration for the tougher times.
I promise you it will pass. It'll pass and it will start slowly, but just be patient and have a little faith. Yeah, if you don't believe in a higher power, it can just be a little faith in yourself.
And finally, a reflection about guiding children through trauma, away from darkness, and towards light.
The human mind and the human heart has so much to offer. I think about the struggle that people face every day and how easy it is to get lost in our own darkness. I have Native ancestry, and cliche as it may be, there's a story of the two wolves that live inside of all of us. One is dark and one is light. One is good and one is the source of all things evil. And they're fighting constantly. They're always fighting for power, for food, for dominance. And in the way that it's told, you ask which one wins. And the one that wins is the one you feed. So my children grew up listening to this story, like I would tell them again and again. It's up to you which one you feed. You have a power inside of you. Do you want to use it for good or do you want to use it for evil? I think they all chose to walk in the light.
Such a nice place to end.
It really is. And congratulations, listeners, on making it through all 4 stories. You've absorbed a lot of wisdom from 4 moms who have really been through it.
We'll be back one more time with a short wrap-up episode. We'll review the key insights about parenting through trauma that these 4 stories from 4 amazing moms brought to the surface.
Looking forward to it.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Dartmouth Trauma Interventions Research Center, hosted by Erin Barnett and Becky Parton. Special thanks to all of our guests. Editing by Kay Jankowski, Erin Barnett, and Becky Parton. Script development, audio production, and music composition by Chris Trimble and Treehouse Audio Productions. Please see the show notes for more information.